Do you want to learn a simple tool that can help you understand yourself and your children better and make you a happier, more calm and confident parent? Stay tuned for a very exciting podcast episode.
Welcome to Parenthood Prep, the only show that helps sleep-deprived parents and overwhelmed parents-to-be to successfully navigate those all-important early years with their baby, toddler, and child. If you're ready to provide the best care for your newborn, manage those toddler tantrums, and grow with your child, you're in the right place. Now, here's your host, baby and parenting expert, Devin Clement.
Hello, and welcome back to Parenthood Prep, the podcast that prepares you for parenthood. I am so excited today for two reasons. Number one, I am going this evening to see Jellicle Ball, which is the new remake of Cats off Broadway, that it takes place in like the queer ballroom scene, and it is getting rave reviews. And I love Cats. It was the first musical I saw on Broadway when I was a kid. I was fortunate enough to grow up close enough to New York that we could come in and see shows. And I know it gets some eye rolls, but it is one of my favorite shows, and I'm so excited to see it in its new treatment tonight, which I think is going to be fantastic. And the other reason is that we have a guest on the podcast, and it is another one of my favorite people in the world. It is Liz Orr, or Elizabeth Orr, as it says on her book cover. She is an Enneagram teacher and coach and author, and she just put out a book called The Unfiltered Enneagram. You may know her from her Instagram page, Rude Ass Enneagram, which is how I got to know her. Unfortunately, we were able to work together on some coaching and become friends. So we have her here today, and I'm so excited to talk about how the Enneagram comes into play when you are becoming a parent and in the early days of parenting, and how knowing and understanding your own Enneagram type can be super, super helpful in terms of, everything that's going on, all the changes you're going through, what advice to follow, what not to follow, how to know, when you're doing the right thing and all that kind of stuff. So hello, Liz.
Devin, hello. It's so good to see you. And it's so good to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much. I am so stoked that you are a famous author and you're here on the podcast. I feel so lucky.
I'm just an author so far.
So why don't you give us just a brief overview for people who may not know what Enneagram is? I'm sure you've been asked this a million times and you have your little explaining to me like I'm dumb.
Sure do, yeah. So the Enneagram, in very broad strokes, is a wonderful framework for self-awareness, for self-compassion, for compassion for others. It is comprised of 9 distinct worldviews, 9 distinct beliefs and fears, 9 distinct defense mechanisms, and 9 distinct emotional ruts that we get into. And they're all equally valid. As you go around the Enneagram symbol and you start to talk about all 9 types.
Just to interject, the types are the numbers 1 through 9.
1 through 9. Thank you. Yes.
But they're not in any kind of quality order.
No, they're not. They're all perfect 10s. Yeah. So as you kind of go around the Enneagram circle, we can all agree that each type is correct to some degree about what they believe about the world. And also, it's not the full scope, but it helps us understand why we protect ourselves in the way that we do. And it can help us see that we don't always have to protect ourselves in that way, and that we actually have a lot more choice than we think we have most times.
I love that. And I think for me, understanding my own type has been so helpful in some of the things that I maybe was angry about myself for, or berated myself for, oh, why can't I ever just make a decision? Why can't I decide on something? Why can't I finish a project? And then it's oh, you're a 7. And it's not an excuse. It's not oh, well, you never have to finish a project ever. But it's now you can understand why you do those things and that it's okay. And that you can, work towards sort of finding an equilibrium that you without being well, I have to turn into a completely different type of person who settles on things and finishes projects and, moves from one thing to another without getting distracted by a million, other things.
That's exactly right. It gives us insight into why we have become the way we have, and that we had good reason to become the way that we have, right? To use you as an example, since we're just going to dive right in. 7s They see the world in terms of such potential and promise. There's possibility around every corner, and that is exciting and thrilling to them. But what they also are correct about in terms of the world is that it's a very disappointing place where a lot of potential gets wasted. And so you can understand why that chase for the next thing or that easy distractibility comes into play when sevens are sort of, torn between the knowledge of how wonderful things could be and the awareness of how often those things don't measure up. And so, of course, they're chasing the next high to medicate the disappointment they're constantly feeling.
It's true. It is true. I think there's obviously so much to talk about here, and people should read your book or listen to the audio, which you read yourself so they can hear more of your lovely voice. Could I ask you to do something that you're going to hate? Could you give us the quickest run through of each type?
I don't hate that at all.
Okay. I just feel like it's so robust.
I can give the quick and dirty.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is something that the type 1s hate, which is I'm going to start with type 8s. And the reason that I start with 8, I start with it in the book as well, is that each Enneagram type falls into what's known as a center. There are 3 centers within the Enneagram. We, as human beings, have all 3 of these centers of intelligence, these processing centers, but we lead with one of them based on what our type is. And so we start in the body center, which is comprised of types 8, 9, and 1. And the body-based intelligence that we all have is when we get goosebumps out of nowhere or the hair on the back of our neck stands up, right? Our body is absorbing something and telling us something. Maybe it's beyond words, but it's an intelligence. It's a type of intelligence that we have. And so type 8 is the beginning of the body center, and they are often referred to as the challenger or the protector. These are, frankly, the badasses of the Enneagram.
She says an 8 herself.
I do say that. I claim it.
I'm surrounded by 8s in my life, and I love it.
Yes. It's great when you're on the right side of an 8. We are a nightmare, however, when we get a little bit pissed off. The beautiful thing of the 8 is this big protective energy. They look out for the underdog. They're really comfortable in the driver's seat. But the suffering for the 8 and for everybody else is that they're really uncomfortable with their vulnerability. They're really afraid. It's not even a discomfort. This will be exploited. And so everything that is soft and tender within them, they bury, they hide away, they reject it themselves so that nobody can get access to it and take advantage of it. That's your 8. The next type in the body center, that's type 9s. They are often referred to as the peacemakers or the mediators. I would contend that they are the most well-liked on the Enneagram. People love them because they're kind of the human equivalent of a chill pill. They're really, really grounding. They're oriented towards reconciling and bringing broken pieces back together. They're very grounded and sturdy people. The suffering for the 9 is that they don't believe that they matter. They think that connection is really fragile and that they are not important enough to hold on to. And so they tend to just numb themselves out to any kind of desire within them or intense emotion within them that might rock the boat. And they just endure in their relationships. It's just incredibly painful. And when they do finally explode, which happens years down the line, it's messy because it's usually not over the thing they're actually upset about.
Yeah. I have some friends that are 9s, and you're right. They're so lovable, but at the same time, they're so incredibly conflict avoidant that if there's any kind of hint of anything going on, they get so uncomfortable. That's interesting because I feel like the 8 is the opposite. They seek out the conflict. They have no problem with it. And while my sister's one, so I'm very familiar with that. That's interesting that they are in the same center, but so different. And I'm curious, after you're done with the 1, I would love to hear how each one you could see kind of playing out in parenting, because as you're talking about it, I'm just thinking of all these situations where if you're a 9 as a parent and your kids are fighting with each other and you're just leaving the room and crying in the corner because you don't want them to be doing that anymore, and realizing that that's something that you can work with, that you can change. Or, you're an 8 as a parent and you're picking fights with your partner because the baby pooped all over the changing table or whatever.
Right. I can touch on all that.
Yeah, I can also see how the 1 would be interesting as a parent because that's the rule follower, right?
Yeah, the 1 is the perfectionist or the reformer.
Which, let me tell you, is super easy to do when there are 10 million zillion parenting books and pieces of advice and pediatricians and experts trying to tell you the right way to do everything.
Yeah, that's a real easy way to be in the world. Yeah, so the perfectionist, the reformer is our type 1s. I like to say about the ones that they are the stubborn optimists of the Enneagram. They really and truly know in their bones that the world can be a better place. We can all do better, but they are so incredibly frustrated that nobody seems willing to put forth the effort to do better, except for them. So their suffering is in this incredibly high standard that they hold themselves to, that they are human and can't hit it all the time. And they believe that there's actually something within them that prevents them from being good enough to be deserving of love. So it's an incredible amount of pressure that they put on themselves that then kind of results in general misery.
Yeah, I could really see that coming into play a lot with parenting, especially in the early days. How much do we feed? How do we, follow the sleep safety and the car seat safety and safety, which is super important, but can get a little crazy about it. And, they should be sleeping. They're not sleeping. They should be on this schedule. They're not on this schedule. And just burying yourself in shoulds.
Yeah. So all 3 types in the body center have a really specific relationship with anger. The 1s, it's a double bind. They really struggle with it because they feel righteously angry about a lot, right? One of the things they believe to be true about the world is that it's a real mess. But anger can be destructive. It can be irrational. It can be messy. So they don't feel like they have the freedom to express the anger that they feel, which again can really set them up for an exhausting experience of parenting, of anything really. But if you're pissed, but you feel like you can't say anything about it or do anything about it, all you can do is swallow this anger. And then it just builds and again, comes out misdirected. And then they feel bad about themselves because they weren't able to control that anger. And really, that's the crux of the parenting struggle for the 8, 9, and 1 is around control. All 3 of these types have very strong feelings and guardedness around their boundaries and their autonomy, their ability to control their lives. For 8s, they're going to be pretty belligerently defensive of their autonomy. So when things are not going their way, they're going to fight it. They're going to see it as a battle of will, and they're going to get pretty ferocious. And that can just send a parent down a shame spiral, right? When they realize oh no, I just exploded over something that really was not worth that explosion because I felt out of control.
And there are so many moments in parenting when you feel completely out of control, especially in the early days when you have a baby and you can't expect them to do anything,
Yeah, it's a mirror to your vulnerability. You actually don't have as much control as you think you do. And that is miserable for everyone, and particularly for the 8, the 9, and the 1. The 9 is going to sort of react in a very different way when they're confronted with their lack of control, which is they're going to disengage. Like you said, they can be really conflict averse. They can really do a lot to numb themselves out of their own feelings. And so they're going to just kind of disappear, not even necessarily physically, but just check out emotionally from the thing and become a little bit paralyzed and unable to take a step towards what needs to happen because they're feeling so overwhelmed and out of control. So the 9 struggle with parenting can look like just sort of disengaging for the sake of keeping everybody else peaceful, but not really speaking up for themselves, kind of losing their own identity, their own selves and what they desire and their needs, and just checking out of difficult moments because it's too much to bear. And then you've got the 1. And as we were saying, control, again, is the issue there, just like the 8 and the 9. And it's about that, I can't seem to do enough to get things right, to make things better. And so the 1s have this tendency to really dig their heels in and insist, no, I'm correct here. I know what is right. And they exhaust themselves by just sort of stubbornly doubling down on what they believe to be the right path, rather than surrendering, rather than giving themselves a break that maybe they don't have to correct this situation. Someone else can help them. So that's where some real struggle and suffering can come in for the one parent.
Yeah, I could see that, as you're talking, so many examples are coming to me. Like, for instance, with the 9, you have, all these well-meaning people in your life giving you advice, your mom, your mother-in-law, your neighbors, your aunt, your sister, your friends with kids, your friends without kids, like your boss, your partner's boss. Oh, why aren't you doing things this way, that way, the other way? And then you can't please everybody. You can't follow everyone's advice the way that they want you to. So you just can completely shut down and check out. And that could be really frustrating. And I think that's something where if you understand that that's who you are and that's what your type is, you can cope with that. With the ones I was thinking of, for instance, something like body feeding, breastfeeding, chest feeding, whatever, we call it. You don't have a ton of control over how that goes. There's certainly things you can do to set yourself up for success. But at the end of the day, your body and your baby are individuals and they're going to do what they're going to do. And if you feel like this is the way, this is what I want to be doing, either your body or your baby is not cooperating, that can, I'm sure, be extremely frustrating.
That is a place where, again, ones can often struggle to forgive themselves. And so such a supportive thing for anyone, whether they're a parent or not, is the practice of self-forgiveness. And that's a great example of a place where recognizing that a lot of it is outside of your control and is not actually reflective of a failing within you, and granting yourself that compassion can really help release some of that suffering and kind of help you move forward, rather than getting stuck in, I'm a bad parent because I can't perform this particular thing that I think is right.
Yeah, 100%. And that self-compassion piece, I think, is so important for all the types, like we were talking about in the beginning, giving yourself a break.
Yes.
Just because you're not the mom next door or, the mom at yoga class or the dad at the park or the dad at yoga class or whatever, that they're just a different person with different circumstances and a different kid. And, all those things are different.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the lovely things about the Enneagram too, is that it really clearly demonstrates there are more than 9, but even if we just stick with the very basic framework of 9 types, there's 9 different types of parents that are suffering and in 9 distinct ways and are thriving in 9 distinct ways. And so even just that very baseline understanding can help recenter us and help us recognize, of course, I'm not parenting the way my sister did or, my mother did or whatever, right? Of course, there's variance here, and what they struggled with, I'm going to struggle with differently,
Totally. And, not for nothing also helps you understand other people and give you compassion for them as well. Even if you don't necessarily know what their type is, just saying this is how I do things because this is my type, but they're a different type and they're going to do things their way, even if it's not the way I think they should once.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I just think it's so valuable. And just to jump aside for a second, because I'm thinking about kids now, right? And we had talked about this a little bit before we jumped on. It's not like astrology where your kid is born and you're they're a Scorpio or whatever. It's something that sort of develops over time or that you understand better in yourself over time. So you can't necessarily type your baby or your 2-year-old or your 5-year-old or whatever, right? And so much of it is self-reflection, right? And self-typing.
That's the whole point. The journey to land on type, it's an internal journey. It's not something we can do for others. I said this to you before we started recording, but I think it's still valuable to speak the language of the Enneagram, even while your kids are young. If all you're doing is just talking about how it's helpful to you, that's powerful for your kids to hear and witness. But, it's also great to teach kids this language and these practices of self-awareness and self-reflection and hold what they say loosely, because we are all figuring out who we are, but they especially are in a tender, squishy place with that. But what a gift to be able to give to your kids is just hey, as a parent, these are the things I'm thinking about and reflecting on and trying to take accountability around in my own life and relationships. And this has been a framework that's been super helpful for me.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that even if you don't necessarily know exactly what their type is, you can see behaviors and you can see these ways that they react to things and say, well, the way that I would respond to an adult who is reacting this way, thanks to my understanding of Enneagram, is to do this. Because, obviously there would only be 9 types of people if we were all the absolute perfect avatar of each type at all times.
Yeah.
It would be like Battlestar Galactica with the 6 robots or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
That there were just copies and copies of. So I think that can be so helpful too, to say, okay, my kid is not the same as me. They are reacting in this way. They're behaving in this way. And here's how I'm going to respond to it the way that I, understand to do that.
Right. This is where I know that this type needs compassion. And here's how I can bring that into how I'm experiencing my kid right now.
I have a great relationship with my mom and I had a great childhood, but parents are parents and they give us all, hang-ups and send us to therapy and everything. But I think our biggest conflicts came from her just not understanding that I was not gonna be just like her, that she could keep her room clean and organized and I couldn't. And she didn't understand why. And there's a lot of reasons for that, neurodiversity and, different things, but just, personality and this and that. And I think it was so frustrating for her to be like, why can't she just do these things that are so easy for me?
Yeah.
And then I was like, why can't I just do these things that are so easy for her? Why can't I, come into the house quietly and speak with a soft voice and not thunder up and down the stairs like an elephant, which she used to accuse me of doing all the time. So, I think that just acknowledging that can be so huge and so helpful. And of course, in your relationship with your partner as well, they're not going to parent the same way you are. They're not going to react to the same things you are. If you each know your type, it can be really nice to kind of, divide and conquer. I don't want to break up the kids' fights. I don't like that. You can do that. And I'll get the gifts for the moms and grandmas. So what's the next group? What's the next center?
The next center is the heart center, our little Care Bears of the Enneagram.
Oh,
that is made up of types 2, 3, and 4. And, similar to the body center, we all have that heart center of intelligence. That is that place within us that is moved by other people, by beauty, by emotion, right? When we feel our heart being moved, right? That's our emotional intelligence stirring within us. And the 2, 3, and 4 lead with that. The 2 is often referred to as the nurturer or the provider. These are the real soft and squishy teddy bears of the Enneagram. They have this beautiful gift of being able to anticipate exactly what is missing within us that is going unmet and meeting it and just making us feel really, really loved by taking care of us. But their suffering is that they look around the world and they see there is not enough love for everyone. And I had better earn whatever love I can experience in this life. And they do that by being generous to the point of martyrdom, right? I have to provide, and I have to never ask for anything in return so that I'm not burdening anyone else. And so they tend to squash down their needs. They overextend themselves too far. But there is this sort of unconscious transactional receipt that is growing in their mind with all the ways they have taken care of other people, but that has not yet been returned to them. So they can get very resentful, very frustrated in their relationships. But again, in wanting to be these ultimate sources of unconditional love, they can't express hey, I paid for dinner the last 3 times we went out. You take me out, right? They can't voice that. And so it just builds.
Well, first of all, I think an important note about 2s is that a lot of women think they're 2s and they misinterpret themselves as 2s because it is such the classic archetype of the socialized as a woman, care about everybody else, nurture everybody else, take care of people's needs. I mean, there's so many things about 2s, I'm not at all a 2, but there's things where I'm oh yeah, I definitely feel like I should be doing that more, So I think that there's that piece in sort of every parent who is socialized, female particularly, and just parents in general, you want your baby to have the best. You want everything for them. So you give and give and give and give until you have nothing left for yourself or really for them. And, just seeing the resentment, like I have, a few friends with like older kids and they'll do these amazing things for their kids. They'll take them on vacation or they'll take them, shopping for the day or take them to the theme park or whatever. And then they're like, these little ingrates, like, don't even care. Like, they don't know, like they're kids that, they don't realize what all like you put into this. Frankly, they're probably overtired and overstimulated and you expect them to just be like falling all over themselves.
And so is the two. The two is probably also overtired and overstimulated, like has not spoken up for themselves.
Yeah. So I think that piece of it, it's so common anyway. So then if you're a two, it's just compounded. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, you've just named exactly what the sort of common suffering of the type 2 parent is, which is overextending themselves and stuffing down their own needs to the point of resentment and frustration and anger. And similar with the 9, when it finally does come out, it's really sloppy because it's not actually about the thing that they're upset about. It's about all of the things that they did not say they were upset about in the moment. And so that's what is really challenging for the 2. Particularly as a parent. And like you said, there is sort of a baked into being a parent, there is a degree of selflessness and self-sacrifice that has to come into play. And for a type 2, that's going to be such an important place to really, really reflect and really, really discern where is this, an occupational hazard of being a parent and where is this my ego that's trying to earn love, right? Then we have type 3s. I like to call them the superstars of the Enneagram. They're just really shiny, dazzling, lovely people, very charismatic. The beautiful gift of the 3 is that they walk into the room and they just kind of like reflect the value that exists in the room without having to do anything. But that's the real key because the 3, their suffering is feeling like they have to do things to prove their value. Their worth as a human being is tied up in their productivity and what they can demonstrate as their value. And so they come to believe they are what they do. And the image becomes incredibly important, which like as a 3, if your kid is having a meltdown in a public place, that can feel like failure because, oh my God, I'm being reflected on poorly because my kid is tired and overstimulated or whatever it is. So that's the real suffering for the type 3 parent is the failure being right there on the surface, being like really, really apparent, and they're not being able to manage the image.
It's almost, up there with the rule following one as like something where kids are really gonna rub up against that and really gonna grade on that. Like if you have an idea about how things are supposed to go because that's the rules, kids will be like, fuck them rules. I'm doing what I want. And if you have an idea of how things are supposed to go because that's the image you want to project, kids are going to be like, fuck your image. I'm going to, you have all these cute outfits you want to take me out in. I'm going to like refuse to wear anything but my Mickey Mouse pajamas every day of my life and throw a screaming fit if you try to get me to wear something else. And that is challenging. That is something that's really difficult to cope with.
Yes, exactly. And to the 3, it feels like a personal failing. It feels like when the image is not perfect and curated, and it feels like all of their flaws and all of the things that they are not good at are on display. But embracing that chaos, embracing the fact that you can't actually like public relations your way out of parenting, and realizing that those like places of imperfection and those places of failure are places where you can actually experience great connection with other parents and even your kid and your partner, that's powerful for the 3.
I think that's actually a huge thing just in parenting and in life is just looking at the other people doing it and going, oh my God, like this shit is crazy. And we're all struggling and it's really hard. And like, I might look better than you in this way. You look better than me in that way, but we're all like having a tough time. Like parents will say to me, oh, like my baby doesn't eat as well, or my toddler's not eating as well as her toddler. I'm like, well, I bet her toddler's not sleeping. or they do some things good and some things not good. And we as adults do the same thing. So just, I think, any type would benefit from communing with others and saying,
Yes.
this fucking sucks and we're all in it together,
Yeah. Yeah. We're all building the plane while we're flying it. And recognizing that, you're right, for every type is going to be a really powerful way to connect, but also to connect to some compassion and, just remember that like, we're all just trying to figure this out.
Yeah. I think it's so easy to have compassion for other people and so much harder to have it for ourselves.
Yes.
There was a meme that a lot of my friends were sharing in like 2020 that said, it's a pandemic. Like, of course things aren't going to get done as well and people are going to be struggling and all that. And that's okay. And then it said, my brain, not you though, me.
Not me though. Exactly. Right.
Like, oh, well, she just has a brand new baby. Of course we're going to, support her and rally around her. And if she is covered in spit up and has her hair in a messy bun and whatever, we're going to tell her she's beautiful, but like, not me though.
Right. Exactly. I'm a failure for the same things that I'm going to like comfort someone else over. Yeah. Speaking of internalizing failures, now we have our type 4.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Our resident drama royalty. Type 4s are often referred to as the romantic or the individualist. Sometimes they're known as the tortured artist. But the type 4s have this beautiful gift of helping us uncover meaning and depth and significance out of the ordinary, out of the boring and the mundane. But the suffering for the 4 is that they really have come to believe that unless they can make special impact in the world, they are not worthy of love. Their existence has to mean something to everyone in order for it to matter enough to be loved. And so anything that they don't have, that they perceive other people to have, they kind of internalize that and they define themselves by what they lack, right? I am what I don't seem to be able to have. I am what I am failing at. And so there's a lot of envy for the 4. They look and compare themselves to everyone else,
which is just a death sentence in parenting. Like, oh my God.
Exactly. It's the fastest way to misery in parenting is to just like, well, they seem to have such a great relationship with their kid, or their kid sleeps so well or eats so well. And, it's because of me that my kid doesn't or won't or can't or whatever. Yeah, the suffering is a lot of envy and comparison.
But also I think there's that element of like, well, my kid is different and special, just like I am.
Exactly. So all 3 of the heart center types, the thing that the 3 of them do, the type 3 gets the worst reputation for it, but the 2 and the 4 are just as guilty, is they all perform. They all are searching for their value outside of themselves. And so they will shapeshift for their audience to be assured of their worthiness. And like you said, when things are going wrong for the 4, they are going to shapeshift into like, well, I'm special and different. And that is what my impact is about. The 3 does that shapeshifting into like, I am hyper competent and productive and impressive. And I'm the, executive who was promoted to partner in my firm with a 6-month-old baby, like, overproducing to be assured of their lovability. And the 2 is the super generous martyr. That's their performance. So there's all this where it was control in the body center. For the heart center, it's about identity and it's about, am I worthy of love?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that can be especially challenging when your kids are very little because they're often not giving anywhere near as much back as you're putting into them. So, that can be really challenging. And again, people socialized as women, you're not getting that feedback from society either. I mean, it's such a cliche, but a dad like walks his kid down the street in the stroller and there's practically a red carpet rolled out for him and like a marching band.
Yep.
And the mom walks her kid down the street in the stroller and everyone's like, you're doing it wrong.
Right. Exactly.
So when you have these identity struggles already and you're like, there's just no way for me to do this to society's satisfaction, that's got to be really challenging. I mean, dads who are 3s and 2s and 4s must have a great time. Or people socialized as men, whether they identify as dads or not. Like, that must be great. Like, oh, look at me. I'm going to take my baby outside the house and I'm going to get, roses thrown at my feet.
True. Although there's suffering in there too for them. Right.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And again, like, I think these qualities, I feel like we're just talking about, like, this is why it's going to be so hard. But these are the things that when you acknowledge them and you understand them, you can make it easier for yourself. Like, this is a challenge. And now you have the tools and the language to accept it, and love yourself. And, that's where the love is going to come from.
Exactly. If and when you read my book, dear listener,
you should read it. It's great.
It's the dead horse that I beat over and over again, which is, we had reason to become the way that we have become, right? 2s did get assured of their lovability when they were super generous and took care of everyone else. And 3s did feel loved when they were incredibly impressive and collecting all the awards and the accolades. And the 4s did earn love because they were special and unique and reminded people of what is special and unique. So these things have served us, and they also are such a critical piece of our suffering. And so remembering like, oh yes, no, this has kept me safe. This has protected me. This has got me what I need, introduces that compassion as we are also looking at like, oh my God, and this has been driving people up the wall and me up the wall. So that's the beauty of the Enneagram too.
Yeah. I mean, ever since I started learning more and more about it and about my type and everything, I have just really come to understand myself so much better and be able to, be so much kinder to myself and to understand other people, which like, that's really what we want at the end of the day, is like just to connect and to understand each other and to have others understand us. Like, my friends that are into it and understand it, we'll talk about it. Like, oh yeah, like, tell me you're a 1 without telling me you're a 1 or whatever. You just feel so seen. And it's really great. Even if what you're being seen by is a meme on Instagram that you put out there. Again, rude ass Enneagram. She, puts out this stuff. And I mean, obviously I love you and you're my favorite, but there's also a lot of others that obviously you can't boil the whole thing down to one little snippet, but there's so much that can be conveyed a lot of the time. And it's less dry than like reading a long article. Honestly, until your book came out, most of the stuff I read about Enneagram was like pretty dry and like, above the head of somebody who was not already kind of an expert. So I'm so glad that it's out there to be more of a resource for people that's a little more relatable.
That was the hope I had in writing the book the way that I did, because you're right. It can be so dense and academic, and that's great. And it's hard to digest when you don't have a basis for it or you don't see what it means on the ground. Yeah. So I wanted my book to be approachable and accessible and silly. So that feedback is my favorite feedback, other than like, fuck you, Liz.
I mean, you get a lot of that from me too. Every time she puts out a new meme set, I'm like, oh, here she is again, attacking me personally. Geez, I thought you liked me. That's fine. I was texting you throughout as I was listening to the book, like, this is exactly this person in my life. This is this person in my life. Like, oh, that's why they are the way they are. Like, it's so interesting. And we're not supposed to type other people, but it's hard not to see the qualities of people who may not have necessarily typed themselves yet in some of the descriptions. And again, like with your kid who you also can't type, it just gives you a little bit more of a framework for understanding.
Does exactly. And it's again, like everyone is like, it's the worst that we can't type other people. We can do it in our head. Just don't tell them. And hold it lightly, right? Like same with your kid. You just put them on their journey and they will figure this out in their due time. And right now, what I know about 4s is that this is what is underneath this behavior that's driving me nuts.
And I think we have more to talk about, but let's just take a little aside and talk about how do you type yourself? I know there's like tests online and stuff and people are like, oh, I took the test and it said this, but I think unlike a lot of other, I'm not going to call it personality typing systems, but self-identity mechanisms, you can't really take a test for it, right? Like one thing I tell people to do is like look at Enneagram Instagram accounts and see which ones you find the most relatable.
I have heard that. I have heard people say to me, like, I was between these two types until this post that you put out, like, really hurt my feelings. So, yeah, I think the benefit of these online tests is that they can help narrow down the field, right? They can help, like, eliminate a few options so that you're not sort of chasing down avenues that are not the type that you lead with.
If people ask me, because they know I'm pretty well versed in this stuff, they're like, what type am I? I'm like, well, you're not this, or this. So just eliminate those and go from there.
Right, exactly. And that can be helpful. But again, these tests can never be perfectly diagnostic. And so holding what the result is loosely and doing the self-reflection and the self-inquiry is really important. And a question that I like to pose to people when they're trying to figure out their type is, who do I think I have to be in order to get my needs met, in order to be deserving of love, in order to get through the day? And what that helps us start to understand and put language to is like how we think we have to show up, who we've had to become, what that defensive personality is that has to navigate the world. And when you understand what that is, and each type has a very distinctive idealized self-image, that is that piece that we're pulling out, that can help you hone in on what your type is, because type is determined by motivation and not necessarily behaviors. So understanding how we think we have to show up can help reveal what we think we're protecting ourselves from. And so that can be a great way to get at not only our type, but really put some of our language to our type, rather than just sort of the generic language of the Enneagram, which is helpful, but is not as specific as the self-reflective work that we then do when we know what our type is.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it becomes clear pretty quickly when you start to think about it that way. Like,
yes,
it was actually funny. Years and years ago, I took a test on an app that I think is actually a pretty decent one. It's very robust. You have to pay for it. And another friend of mine took it recently. And I'll tell you why it's funny, because I get to the end and it said I was a 7. And then it gives this description and it has quotes. And one of the quotes was, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then it said, Devin, a successful businesswoman. And I was like, what? Like literally that was who the quote was from. Some other Devin who was a 7. But recently a friend of mine took the test and she was like, is this you? I was like, no. And I freaked out when I saw it the first time too. It was like 10 years ago. And I was like,
that's amazing.
What the fuck? So if I wasn't already sure that this is my type, then now it's like spooky.
Yeah. The universe was like, this is your type.
Exactly. Anyway, that is how you type yourself. Moving along to the
head center. Yes, we're in your territory now.
My territory.
Yes. So the head center types are types 5, 6, and 7. Again, we all have this noggin center of intelligence. We all have a processing, observing, and insight generating type of intelligence that we exercise in the world. Takes in information and surroundings and possibilities and puts out something new from that, whether that's insight or guidance or pathways or patterns. So we all have that. And the 5, 6, and 7 excel at these things and also suffer with these things. So the real common suffering for these 3 types is fear and anxiety around the future and whether or not they can trust themselves to make the right decision in the future. So for the 5, they have this really precise, deep, analytical brain that loves to just plunge to the depths of research, immerse itself completely, and try to understand things to their completion. Like, why do people tick the way they tick and why do things work the way they work? They really can just deep dive for hours into information and research.
And there's certainly none of that out there in the parenting world. No opportunities to go absolutely off the cliff of research and expertise and knowledge and studies and history, and
definitely no content out there. No,
none.
So, I mean, that's a great example of how the 5 gets overwhelmed, though, right? Because the question of, can I trust myself to know what the right next step is really like plaguing them. And they always feel like the thing that I don't know is the missing piece of information that I need in order to make the right decision. But they don't trust themselves that they've read enough or consumed enough or researched enough to have that missing piece of information. 5s are also like, they get this reputation of being like really robotic and stoic, but they're actually real sensitive sweethearts. And it's because they're so sensitive that they tend to protect themselves by being really rational and logical and predictable, because they're trying to guard themselves from being overwhelmed, which certainly there's nothing to overwhelm a parent, for sure.
No, definitely. It's like smooth sailing all the time. Parents are just whelmed, just a normal amount.
Right. And so schedules is a place where 5s try to exert a lot of control. Like, I want to know when things start, when things end, so that I know how much energy I can budget for this thing. And as we know, kids are famous for being on time and attentive to schedules.
Yes. And knowing, when they wake up in the middle of the night, exactly how long it's going to take to get them back to sleep.
Exactly.
How long it's going to take to get out of the house when we have somewhere to be. I saw an Instagram video the other day where mom was talking about her 2-year-old wanting to do everything herself. And she's like, so now everything takes 87 times as long. And I think that is an accurate assessment. I think that is an accurate number. I'm not sure what her scientific research was, but it checks out for me.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see that being so frustrating to deal with, just so much uncertainty and not knowing that, that there's no right answer. There just isn't.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what you read next or what you look up. Like, you have to make a decision at some point and you have to rely on yourself at some point. And that is terrifying to the 5. The 6, you mentioned uncertainty, and that's where the real suffering for the 6 is. I forgot to mention the archetypal name of the 5, which is the researcher or the observer.
I was just going to say, I could see going back to the 5, and this is in no way coming from my place as the partner of a 5. I could see it being a little frustrating if you were one of the more emotional types, the body type or the heart type, being partnered with someone who's a 5 who's saying, this is the information, these are the facts, and me being like, well, this is what we're looking at here, and it's different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as a partner to a 5, understanding that as their attempt to find reassurance, to find something to hold on to when they are feeling so overwhelmed, can help bring a little compassion into your frustration. And for the 5, like recognizing, I'm trying to create certainty where it probably doesn't exist. And I'm trying to protect myself from being overwhelmed, but maybe I have more to give to this than just like, here's some facts and figures. So that's a great case study. With the understanding of the Enneagram, can bring in some more compassion into what could be a really frustrating moment. So our type 6, our loyal skeptic or our guardian, our devil's advocate,
ball of anxiety,
very loud about their anxiety. They are. No, they are. They're very like
doomsday prepper.
Yes. These are folks who they have Tylenol and Advil in their bag and dry socks and snacks and an umbrella and sunscreen. They're ready.
And charged power banks.
Charged power banks too. Yes.
My ex is a 6, love him to death. And we would like meet up, whatever. And I'd be like, oh, can you bring me a power bank? 'Cause he was always coming from his office. Can you bring me a power bank? And he kept buying me power banks, like, for me to have. I was like, you don't understand that the problem is not that I don't own any power banks. It's that they are never charged and they are never with me. And you always have them with you and fully charged. So if you would just keep loaning me power banks that are fully charged, that'll be great.
That is hysterical.
He just really thought that was going to solve the problem.
No. And probably like the fact that didn't solve the problem was like anxiety inducing to him, because he's like, I'm trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to mitigate the problem. And it's like, no. You're misunderstanding the problem.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's so funny. So 6s, right. They're super, super prepared, and they're really trying to prevent disaster. They see the world as a really dangerous place, which I think we can all agree it certainly is. And they are afraid that they do not have the resources within to keep themselves and their loved ones safe. And so they're always trying to mitigate disaster, always trying to anticipate what could go wrong so that they can avert it. But they don't trust themselves that they will anticipate everything that could go wrong. So a lot of suffering for the 6 in that. They too will sort of outsource their sense of agency, and they'll look to other people to give them advice, or they'll look to sort of trusted institutions. Again, it's a lack of trust in self. So they never seem to trust these external things they're trying to trust because they don't think that they can discern it properly. So, I mean, the world is uncertain. That's all that we can be assured of.
I feel like a 6 would be a great parent to have like in your play group or like in your mom's group, because they're just always prepared. I am the, scatterbrained 7 and I forgot a diaper. Can I borrow one? Or like, do you have sunscreen? Not me going up to strangers at the beach when I forget my sunscreen and asking if I can just have little spritz. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's great, but it can also be stressful, right? Because another thing about kids is there's so many ways they can get hurt, get, into trouble, break things, just so much danger and potential issues everywhere. And I think the 6 really sees all of those possibilities as equally likely, and the likelihood being 100%.
Exactly. It's not just like possible, it's imminent. And they're like, and what am I missing? What have I not imagined? Because that's the thing that sort of keeps them running on the hamster wheel. And so what's funny about 6s too is, to your point, like they are the ones who in a crisis or in a dangerous moment, like they get us through it really, really well. Then as soon as the moment is over, they forget that they were actually the superheroes. Oh, them. Like they kept us safe. And so coming to take a risk as a 6. So again, they get stuck in this sort of mental preparation loop, which will often prevent them from taking the next step forward, from taking an action, making a decision. And so the growth path for a 6 is, I might still be terrified. I might not trust that I've thought of everything that could go wrong, but I'm going to trust that I'm going to take this next step. I'm going to take an action. And even if I didn't anticipate everything that could go wrong, I will be able to navigate it when I get there. It's this sort of like courage.
Yeah. And trusting that you have the resources within you as well as in your diaper bag to handle situations.
Yeah. And the people that you have around you.
The sort of real world example I'm thinking of is how many products are out there now to monitor, keep track, protect. You can monitor your baby's like pulse ox while they're sleeping. Yeah. Oh my God. There's so many things that are like, just tell me if my kid is dying, which I think can be helpful, but can also go way overboard and become like paranoia machines. I remember years ago seeing a baby monitor like on the shelf at a store that said, hear every peep. And I was like, who wants that? Like, no, thank you. Leave some peeps alone. Put those peeps back. Let them peep. It's fine.
Right.
But I could see a 6 parent being like, I could hear every peep. That sounds amazing. I want to hear every peep.
Right. And then I'm going to analyze every peep, and I'm going to know what are distressed peeps versus what are content peeps.
And now there's all these apps, and there's the video that records the baby and analyzes it in the app, and like it'll drive you up the wall. I mean, again, a lot of them are great if used, with the proper mindset, but I think they do take away so much self-trust and trust in your baby. And then people get like, this might be more of a 5 thing, but what do you think about like logging, like every single thing your baby and kid does, which is super important in the beginning when they're newborns. You want to monitor their feeding. You want to make sure they're peeing and pooping. When they get a little older, you might be monitoring their sleep because you're doing sleep training or getting them on a schedule. But, I feel like we've always done it with like pen and paper. And then when these apps started coming out, like I'll meet someone with a 9-month-old and she's still like logging every diaper in the app. And it's like, you don't really need to keep doing that.
Right. Again, that's all that like grasping for certainty, security, like assurance outside of ourselves. We're all trying to feel like we have more control over things than we actually do. And so to log things is very 5-ish, but also very 6-ish, right? It's also like, I'm trying to establish some predictability in a world that doesn't feel predictable, you know. Last but not least.
Certainly not least.
Whenever I teach a workshop, I'm always like, last and least, we have our 7.
She's the meanest. Rude ass Enneagram is not a joke. She's very rude.
I've earned it.
She wanted to title the book Rude Ass Enneagram, but they wouldn't let her put ass in the title.
Which is funny because it's on the cover. It's on the cover, but I got shut down. Yeah.
Yeah. But I like that, the unfiltered Enneagram, because that's what it is.
It sets up my next book, which will be the Unhinged Enneagram.
No, that's amazing. No, now you have to do that.
So speaking of unhinged, the 7. So type 7s are often referred to as the epicure or the adventurer. Sometimes they're known as the maverick. But 7s have this beautiful, beautiful gift of being able to see the possibility and promise in everything. They just like potential is around every corner and in every person. But the suffering, like we were talking about earlier, it's the awareness that so much potential is wasted and so much mediocrity is accepted in place of what is possible, right? So much fails to measure up to what could be. And there's this fear within the 7. It's sort of a 2-layered fear, right? The top layer is like the world is trying to hold me back from experiencing the top of potential, from experiencing the top of my potential, other people's potential, possibility, the fullness that exists in the world. But the lower level of that is there's something within me that holds me back from experiencing or expressing my full potential and bringing about what I see as possible. Yeah, there's a lot of trying to avoid that disappointment and that letdown. They are doing everything they can to avoid being trapped or deprived. They have a bit of a they're softly rebellious. They're charming about it, but they're kind of trying to not buck any restraints that are placed upon them in a fun and flirty way. Like parenting can feel like a trap, especially those like long nights when the kid isn't sleeping.
Yeah. Or you can't leave the house, just gave birth and you're like laid up in bed because your body is physically recovering from the most dramatic thing that's probably ever going to happen.
Yeah.
That you kind of hope is the most dramatic thing that's ever going to happen to your body. Yeah. And I mean, even just as you were saying it, I think of myself. I mean, I don't have my own children. And a big part of the reason is because it is so restrictive. I have the best of both worlds. I see babies at work. I cuddle them. I, laugh with them, that we have a great time. And then I go home where I can do whatever I want. And the thought of a life where I was so dependent on another person's like constant needs and schedule and everything else. I mean, I joke all the time that I would have like absolutely a full-time nanny because I have spooned enough applesauce into enough mouths that I am done. Like, I'll do it here and there to be cute, but I am not sitting in front of a high chair 3 times a day spooning applesauce into somebody's mouth. Like, I have done that enough. I'm done.
Right.
The novelty of the applesauce has worn off. No.
Yeah. As a parent, again, as we were talking about with the 2s, right, there's baked into it like this necessity of selflessness that you have to be willing to drop everything for these helpless little, squishmallows that are depending on you for their survival. And, even simple things like you can't shower some days.
Try peeing.
Right. I mean, that can become a trap. Yeah. That can feel incredibly claustrophobic and suffocating for a 7. And then of course, also with, similar to how we talked about with the 3s, like it's confronting. You maybe have this fantasy of what you think you could be as a parent. And so there's that secondary fear of like, oh, there's something within me that can't bring about this potential parent that I thought I could be.
Oh yeah. I think that is a rude awakening for a lot of people of any type. Just like, this was my image of how it was going to go. And it's so different. Yeah. And a lot of it is just so like mundane. And like, I remember a client asking me with her like twin newborns, like, when can I take them to a museum? I was like, they probably won't get anything out of it until they're at least like 4 or 5. Like, I think, you envision yourself at these different stages, maybe with like a 6-month-old, like a cute little, like bubbly, happy baby, or like a 4-year-old who's talking and having conversations with you and like are so interesting and cool. And you don't envision this like little blob, this like alien, this fancy potato that is just a need and gives absolutely nothing back. Like, it's not great. They do eventually.
Eventually. Something I've heard, said many times about parenting is like, the days are long and the years are fast. And really, like, the days are long. The days are really long for all the types, but especially for a 7.
And so you just have this vision of all these things you want to do, and they just become so difficult, and everything takes 87 times as long. That is a scientific fact.
That is the official government approved
scientific fact.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. So just having this vision of, and I did for a long time, and I had like babysat, obviously, like I've been around families and stuff like that. But in the day to day of those early days of a baby, you don't really see that, especially in our society and culture, like where we're not, family units and villages and stuff like that. Like Alex, until our friend had a baby, had never seen a newborn, never mind held one. So I think it's kind of a rude awakening what that, is actually like. It was actually really funny because the next day he said to me, the baby was like about 3 weeks old when we met him. He goes, I can't get over how useless his limbs were. They were just like flopping around. Like, I mean, a newborn baby is like essentially a raw chicken with a head on it. It's just like, bony elbows and like, yeah. So just these things that we don't envision are now suddenly really cramping our style.
Yep.
That can be challenging.
For a 7, there is this tendency to distract themselves and to chase the next high and to like try to even reframe like, oh, this isn't disappointing. It's fine or whatever. Do what you got to do to get through the day. And
this doesn't suck at all. I want it spit up on my shirt.
Right. And I think the challenge that I like to pitch to 7s is to try to find ways to become satisfied with what is in the moment right now. That this moment, even if it's frustrating, it's enough. I don't actually have to go chasing something else. I'm not actually trapped. This moment will pass. This feeling will pass. And right now is as it should be. And I don't need to do anything to push it towards something potentially better.
Yeah, I like that. It's important, for a lot of types, it's important to just look at the moment.
Yeah, be present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is harder than it sounds, especially when you're spooning applesauce in for the 50 millionth time.
Yes.
But yeah, it's important because there are going to be great moments. There are going to be really wonderful ones. And you want to be able to enjoy those and embrace those and not be thinking, why can't it be like this all the time?
Exactly.
And sometimes it's so simple. Like I always tell the story of twins I cared for years ago where I'm still very close to the family, still in touch with they're like going to be actually their birthday just passed. I forgot to send them a birthday text. They're 11. Anyway, I was caring for them overnight, like 5 nights a week. That was my job. That's what I do. And there was, one night where one of the babies was super fussy, super difficult. Like I joked with the mom later that I was like ready to throw her out the window. I was ready to like tell her I'm not coming back. See you never. And then in the morning, I had her like in a carrier when I was like washing the bottles and stuff. And she just let out this like little sigh, this like, and just like that, all was forgiven. Like
totally worth it.
All my frustration went right out the window where I wanted to throw her. Like, and it just was totally worth it. And I was like, I love you. Like they really do that to you. They just can change in an instant and turn so quickly. So even when you're super frustrated and everything is making you insane, it really can turn around really quickly. So
it can, and it will pass. I think that's like the biggest message to the 7 is like, it will pass. Again, if we come back to this like question of trust, which is the suffering for the head types, for 7, it's the trust. Can I withstand the disappointment, the trap, the suffocation, the deprivation? And you can. Like so much of our misery in life is because we're trying to resist something rather than just feeling it. And so just being present to the frustration and trusting it will pass. And I have enough within me to survive this frustrating, disappointing, suffocating moment. And then there will be this like sweet, wonderful, delightful moment that could not be surpassed, right? But I have to learn how to be present to all of it.
It's true. And, from a practical standpoint, you can figure out ways to fill your cup, to get what you need for your type. So yeah, do you have any parting just words in general for people that are newly experiencing Enneagram, or people who know about it, or new parents who might be curious about?
I mean, again, I think the thing that I can't overstate is that all of the ways that we have learned how to be in the world came about for a good reason. And even when they're frustrating to us and we feel like we are getting in our own way, I think it's so important to pause and say like, okay, and this has served me, right? I'm fighting this thing now, but it has served me. It has gotten me what I need. And that can just inject the littlest bit of self-compassion that can help us then like breathe and become present to what is going on and figure out what are the choices I have now. Do I have to rely on this old pattern, or do I have other options available to me? Can I, as an 8, find a way to be a little softer and more vulnerable in this moment? As a 9, can I figure out a way to become more engaged in this moment rather than, disengaged and numb? As a 1, can I forgive myself? Can I let myself off the hook in this moment? As a 2, can I ask for what I need? Can I get some help rather than trying to be everyone's provider? As a 3, can I fail? Can I let myself fail in this moment and let someone see who I really am? As a 4, can I just accept the like boring mundaneness of this task without needing to perform how special I am within it? Can I give myself a break from proving how special I am? For the 5, can I be overwhelmed and like let someone else in on my overwhelm rather than isolating or pushing people away? As a 6, can I just make a decision and take a risk and figure it out when I get there? And as a 7, can I be present to my disappointments and just let it pass rather than trying to distract myself from it?
Yeah, that's a big one. And since 7s are classic reframers, which when you said that was our flaw or whatever it was, and I said, but isn't that a good thing? And you said, way to reframe that. Yeah. So something that I was thinking while you were saying that was that there's also a positive side to all these traits. Like the things that got you, like you said, they got you here.
Yes.
For a reason. Like, yes, maybe I can't necessarily stick to something all the time and see it all the way through. But guess what? If the plan changes, if things change, I am right there with the changes. Like, I don't need to stay stuck on the path and get, stressed out about it. Like,
exactly.
Depending what, your type is, there's a lot of really positives to it too. And a lot of times they're just the reverse side of the same coin.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Liz, for joining us. This has been so great. And tell us one more time where to find you.
You can find me on Instagram, Rudas Enneagram.
And that is just, in case you've never even heard of it, ENNEAGRAM.
Yes, that's exactly right. Enneagram. And Rudas Enneagram is one word. And to Devin's point, the beautiful side of each Enneagram type you can find on pretty much any other Enneagram Instagram account. Occasionally I'll reference it, but it's mostly the shadow side. And then, I have a book that's out there in the universe now, and buy it on any bookseller that you can find, whether big bad Amazon or small local bookstores.
Yeah, we love bookshop.org. We recommend it. We sent out some gift cards to them, to some of our winners in the early days of the podcast, which was cool. Yeah, I think it's great because you can just like get books from independent bookstores, but it's like as easy as, a large retailer. Of course, if you have a local bookstore, go there and check it out. But her book, I will say, is not nearly as rude as the Instagram. It has a lot of really lovely, positive messages. And I think it's just so important to really just to get to know yourself, and makes you a better person and a better parent. And thank you so much, Liz, for joining us. I hope we get to do this again.
I'm sure you will. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, listen up, folks. We love to joke around, but it's time to get real. And that real talk, it's all about giving your babies the roasting they deserve. Yep, you heard it right. We're calling for an epic baby roast. We want you to drop a voice note on our website and call out your little ones for their adorable crimes. Did your baby spit up on your brand new dress the second you put it on? Or maybe they decided to scream through your sister's wedding vows. We want to hear all the juicy details. Head over to happyfamilyafter.com or hit the link in the show notes. Every page on the site has a button on the side for you to record straight from your phone. Your story might just make it onto an episode of the Parenthood Prep podcast. We can't wait to hear.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Parenthood Prep. If you want to learn more about the services Devin offers, as well as access her free monthly newborn care webinars, head on over to www.happyfamilyafter.com.